carbon credits are also financing hydro dams throughout the third world. Many, many hundreds of hydro dams. And hydro dams stopped being economic many decades ago. All the good hydro sites were taken up, say, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And the ones that remain aren't economic to develop. Well, now with carbon credits from the West, those hydro dams are being developed. And when you build a hydro dam, you're often taking out a river valley. Often that's the most arable land in the country. So we're losing arable farmland. We're losing species because these uneconomic dams are being built. We're often relocating a lot of people, so they're losing their livelihoods because we're building these economic dams. So Kyoto has devastating environmental consequences. It's not just an economic calculus that we have to look at.
Wasn't a major hydro dam put in China that displaced a few million people?
That's right. The Three Gorges Dam, the biggest dam ever built, and in fact, the Three Gorges Dam has been opposing it. Has been a lot of the work of my foundation's Probe International division. It's been the chief organization opposing this dam since 1990.
What happened to all those people?
Well, they were driven off their land. They were typically promised compensation. They were told they would have a cash settlement and equal land elsewhere. Often, when they showed up at the government department to collect their compensation for their land, they were told, "Oh, I see you've already received your compensation." So what happened was corrupt officials would sign in for them, take their money. So as a result, there's been all kinds of riots when people were denied their compensation. Out of desperation, many have resorted to violence. Others that didn't, when they went to the new lands, they found that instead of the lowlands that they were used to, say, and fertile land by the river, they were given land high up that wasn't arable, and it's not surprising that the land which wasn't settled wouldn't be desirable land. That's why it hasn't been settled. But that's what the government would give them as compensation. So it created enormous upset, and several million people were moved. Cities were inundated. Species were affected. Archaeological treasures were inundated. Enormous cost, the cost to navigation as well. To finance the hydro dam, the Three Gorges Dam, a national tax was imposed on electricity users throughout China, because although the dam was promised to come in at a low cost, it was expensive in the end, and so expensive that no one wanted to buy power from the Three Gorges Dam. They wanted to buy power from other electricity sources. So the government forbade that, forced everyone to take power from the dam, and to finance the dam, they imposed this tax on users across the country, regardless of whether they were actually using power from the dam.
Lawrence, are you familiar with the energy source called helium-3?
No, I'm not.
It's the source of energy that Harrison Schmitt wrote his book Return to the Moon about. That's very prevalent, this energy source called helium-3. He's very interested in making sure we have available here. That's supposed to be phenomenal. I'll find out on Thursday. Want to go to the moon for this next electric opportunity?
Well, I don't view there being any energy crisis. I think there is enormous amounts of fuel of all varieties. The only question is the cost of the energy, whether financial cost or environmental cost, and that will vary from region to region. But I don't see there being any energy shortage of any kind materializing in centuries.
Do you have any concern about our grid, both in Canada and the United States?
Well, the grid isn't isn't as reliable as it should be. The UK grid became very reliable after it was privatized in 1989, 1990. Before then, it had been derelict, lots of outages. After privatization, there was a very good regulatory regime was brought into the UK, where the private grid company would have to pay if it inconvenienced its customers by having power outages, and the grid became very good at avoiding discomforting its customers. It's the way it's a very good model for all of us.
What is this big explosion about bloom energy? What is it? It just came out. It was on Google. I guess Google's on the board, or Google's part of this new bloom energy. What is it?
Well, there's a lot of hype about it. It's the latest incarnation of the fuel cell, which is a gizmo. It's a battery-like gizmo that can be fueled by natural gas. The bloom cell would be fueled by natural gas, and the idea is that you don't need to have a grid, an electricity grid. You can just have one of these little fuel cells, which are, say, the size of a small fridge for a house, or a large fridge, or several fridges for a company, and you can dispense with power lines coming into your house. You would instead run your fuel cell off natural gas, or in some areas you might run it off a different biogas.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's mostly hype, but ultimately there are lots of competing fuel cells out there. I think they all have their place. The problem with the bloom box, as well as the problem with energy technologies generally, is that the government plays such a large role in picking winners and losers that it distorts the economy for all these energy technologies. So the fuel cell, the bloom box, is getting government subsidies, and the idea behind it is that it could eliminate the electricity grid. Meanwhile, governments are pouring billions of dollars into next generation electricity grids. So the two are unlikely to coexist, at least as presently imagined. So there's a disconnect caused by competing government policies, and in my view, the only way to sensibly sort it all out is for government to abandon the energy business entirely and let the bloom energy and all the other technologies find their own place in the energy marketplace.
Do you think that you and I are going to be alive to be forced to use carbon measuring devices and to have them in our homes and cars?
No, I think all that's going to disappear pretty soon. I think the whole carbon dioxide scare will be disappearing.
Fabulous. That's fabulous. Because that's really scary. Because that means you have to have carbon measuring devices in the ocean. You have to have carbon measuring devices on every living thing if you really want to calculate it all. Don't you?
Yeah, well, it's not a realistic. It's another one of these utopian schemes. I don't think it will go anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been listening to, learning from Lawrence Solomon, the author of The Deniers, the world-renowned scientist who stood up against global warming hysteria, political persecution, and fraud, and those who are too fearful to do so, and the executive director of Energy Probe. Lawrence, thank you so much for your time today, and we hope that you'll join us again.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.